Hi everyone, welcome to Geometry Lesson 2.2, Conditional Statements. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about what a conditional statement is, different forms of conditional statements, and how to represent them in a sentence form. A conditional statement is any statement that can be written in the form if P, then Q. Now, P and Q represent statements that you would make. And if the first condition happens, then the next thing will happen. So for example, you could say, if I get an A on my test, then my mother will be happy. That is a conditional statement. Okay, the P part of the conditional statement would be getting an A on the test. The Q part of that conditional statement would be my mother will be happy. Okay, so a lot of these sentences can be written symbolically. This arrow represents then, and we can also represent them using a Venn diagram. Notice the first part of the condition that needs to be met is on the inside, and the outside represents the second part of the conditional. Now, the first part of the conditional statement has a special name. It's known as the hypothesis, okay, and generally it's going to follow the word if. The second part of the conditional statement is known as the conclusion, and it follows the word then. Now, conditionals can be written without the words if and then, but for this class, we're going to be specifically using those words to show which part is the hypothesis and which part is the conclusion. Now, statements can be made that are conditional without those words, but we're going to be changing them into a statement with the words if and then. So whenever you write a conditional, put those words in there. So for example, I could say, when I go to school, I get homework. Okay, I can change that into a conditional because there is a condition happening. I have to go to school and then I'm going to receive homework. So if I go to school, then there is homework. And that's how I would write that. Now let's take a look at an example where we need to figure out what the hypothesis and the conclusion of a given conditional is. In example 1, they want us to identify the hypothesis and conclusion of each conditional statement. In part A, it says if a butterfly has a curved black line on its hind wing, then it is a viceroy. And in part B, it says a number is an integer if it is a natural number. So what you're going to do is you're going to pause the video, see if you can figure out which statement is the hypothesis and which one is the conclusion, and then press play to check your answers. So what I've done is I've taken the hypothesis part of the conditionals and I've made them pink. And then the conclusions are in that purple color. So in part A, notice I didn't include the if, but it's the part that follows the if. A butterfly has a curved black line on its hind wing. That is the hypothesis. The conclusion also does not include the word then, but it's everything that follows it. It is a viceroy. That is your conclusion. Now, part B was a little harder because they didn't give the words if and then. So what you needed to do was figure out which part depends on the other one. So here we have, it is a natural number as our hypothesis, and the conclusion is that the number is an integer. Now this if kind of helped us a little bit because this follows it, so we know that that's the hypothesis, but the word then was missing here. So we have another example for you to try. Now this is going to go on a Google Doc that you're going to turn in, and that's going to count as your classwork. In this statement, you need to identify the hypothesis and conclusion. A number is divisible by 3 if it is divisible by 6. So see if you can figure out which parts are the hypothesis and the conclusion, and then move on from this example to see what example 2 is. In example 2, they want us to write a conditional statement from the following information they've given us. So in part A, it says the midpoint M of a segment bisects the segment. So remember, we do need to try and use English to write this. So we need to think through our grammar rules But think about which part is the subject that's going to turn into the hypothesis, and which part is going to be the conclusion that's going to turn into the conclusion of the statement. Okay, don't forget the words if and then. In part B, they've given us this Venn diagram. So I'd suggest maybe backing up the video to that first slide where we talked about which part needs to be the hypothesis and which part needs to be the conclusion, and then write an if-then statement based on this. So pause the video, do that, and then press play to check your answers. For part A, the conditional statement would be something like this. Now, you might have had something a little different, but I'll explain about that. It says, if M is a midpoint of a segment, then it bisects the segment. So you want to be very careful about how you divide that up. We need to talk about the midpoint. So you could say, if it's a midpoint, then it bisects the segment, but you want to have the M here too. You don't necessarily need this of a segment in this first part. Okay. So you want to just be careful. The bisect needs to be in the conclusion because that's what it's telling us. If it's a midpoint, then it's going to bisect. Okay, so just be a little careful about how you word that. If you're not sure, put it in your classwork and I can check it for you and let you know if you're right or wrong. In part B, remember this inside circle is going to be the hypothesis. The outside circle is going to be the conclusion. So I wrote, if it's a blue jay, then it's a bird. Notice I added the it is a because that made it sound more like English. Because if you just write if blue jay, then bird, your English teachers would not be happy with us. So try and make it sound like something that would make sense in English. Don't forget those verbs, kind of important. And again, if you have questions about how to do that, just let me know. Okay, so there's one more check it out question for you. Okay, so this is also going to go on your Google Doc for your classwork. Check it out. Number 2 says, write a conditional statement from the sentence, 2 angles that are complementary are acute. So pause the video, add that onto your Google Doc, and then press play to see what's next. So now we're going to talk about truth value. Now, truth value is one of those things that when you see it in the directions, most people have no idea what to do. But it's very simple. It's just asking you true or false. So if I say give the truth value, it's saying write the word true or false. So tell me if it's true or false. Now, how do we determine truth value for a conditional? That's a little interesting. Okay, a conditional is false only when the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. So this means that you check the hypothesis first. Always look at that first. If the hypothesis could never happen, just write true for the entire statement. Okay, if the hypothesis is true, then check the conclusion to see if that's also true. If both of them are true, then the entire statement is true. Okay, if the first part is true and the next part is false, then the entire statement is false. Okay, now to prove that a statement is false, you need a counterexample. And we talked about that way back in lesson 1, how to find a counterexample. Remember, it is a specific example that shows that the statement is false. So one specific example, okay? And it has to make the hypothesis true and the conclusion false. So remember, that's our goal. If the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false, our counterexample is a good one. So the examples for this are actually going to be on the next video. So don't forget to open that up and watch through that next video.